Exactly 1 year and 2 days ago, on January 17th, 2025, two men sat in Moscow and signed a piece of paper. The room was likely air-conditioned, the handshakes were stiff, and the press release was standard diplomatic boilerplate. At the time, Western diplomats dismissed it. They called it a marriage of convenience. The New York Times ran an op-ed calling it an act of desperation between two pariah states. Washington looked at the photos, shrugged, and moved on to the next crisis in the Pacific. They were wrong. Today, speaking to you from January 2026, with the benefit of hindsight, we can see that that signature was the most underestimated geopolitical event of the last decade. It was the moment the tectonic plates of the global order didn't just shift, they locked into a new, dangerous formation. Because while the CNN cameras were focused on the front lines in Eastern Europe and the tensions in the South China Sea, Russia and Iran weren't just shaking hands. They were building a machine. They were engineering a complex, multi-layered mechanism designed to do one specific thing: make Western sanctions scientifically useless. And if you are sitting there thinking this is just some distant geopolitical game that doesn't affect you in Ohio, or Manchester, or Berlin, think again. Because the price of gas at your local pump, the inflation rate eating your savings, and the stability of your own economy are being decided right now by the clauses of that very treaty. Today, we are going to open the full text of the Comprehensive Strategic Partnership Treaty, the document that turned a temporary friendship into a permanent problem for the United States. We are going to deconstruct the legal architecture of the new authoritarian axis. To understand the world of 2026, we need to answer three fundamental questions. First, what is actually written in the controversial Article 2 regarding foreign interference? And does it legally oblige Russia to send troops to save the Ayatollahs from their own people? Second, how does the new North-South trade route physically bypass the U.S. Navy, rendering the blockade strategy obsolete? And third, why is the White House suddenly realizing that their strategy of containing these two adversaries separately is no longer mathematically possible? Let's break it down. Before we dissect the legal text, we have to understand the context. For centuries, Russia and Iran were not natural allies. In fact, they were natural enemies. They fought wars over the Caucasus. They competed for energy markets. For decades, the distrust ran deep. Iran remembered how the Soviet Union occupied its northern territories in World War II. Russia viewed Iran as an unpredictable religious fundamentalist state that could destabilize its own southern borders. Even as recently as 2020, their relationship was transactional. It was fragile. Washington relied on this fragility. The entire Western strategy was built on the assumption that, eventually, Moscow and Tehran would turn on each other. But the war in Ukraine changed the calculus of survival. When the West cut Russia off from the European economy, Vladimir Putin didn't just need weapons. He needed a logistical lung. He needed a pathway to the world that NATO didn't control. Simultaneously, Iran, suffocating under decades of sanctions, saw an opportunity to finally gain a superpower patron who wouldn't lecture them on human rights. The document signed in January 2025 codified this necessity. It transformed a transactional relationship into an existential one. And that brings us to the document itself. When the full text of the treaty was finally leaked to the public, many Western analysts initially let out a sigh of relief. They were scanning the document for a specific phantom. They were looking for a NATO-style Article 5. They were looking for a sentence that said, if you attack Iran, Russia must declare war on the aggressor. They didn't find it. The language wasn't there. And because they didn't find that specific smoking gun, they called the treaty weak. They called it symbolic. This was a catastrophic misreading of legal terminology. The danger of this treaty isn't in what it says about external war. It is what it says about internal survival. Look closely at Article 2. It mandates cooperation in, quote, end quote, countering foreign interference and attempts to destabilize internal political situations. In normal times, in a standard trade agreement, this is just diplomatic noise. It's filler. But look at the calendar. These are not normal times. Since the Iranian rial collapsed in late December, we have seen waves of protests rocking Tehran and Isfahan. We have seen the regime wobble. Under the definitions of this treaty, to the Kremlin, a popular uprising in Tehran is not a revolution. It is defined legally as foreign interference. This specific legal wording gives Russia the green light to intervene, but not with tanks, not with divisions of conscripts. That is the old way of thinking. This clause authorizes the deployment of specialists, digital surveillance teams, riot control experts from the Rosgvardia, intelligence sharing on dissident networks, perhaps even private military contractors disguised as technical advisors. This is the trap the West failed to see. Russia is not obligated to fight the U.S. Navy to save Iran. That would be suicide, and Moscow knows it. But Russia is now legally committed to saving the Iranian regime from its own people. They have created a dictator's insurance policy. Think about what that means. If the Iranian regime feels threatened by a domestic uprising, they can now call Moscow and cite Article 2. Moscow can deploy resources to crush that dissent, claiming they are merely fulfilling a treaty obligation to prevent destabilization. Unlike a military alliance, which is visible and involves troop movements that satellites can track, this assistance happens in the shadows. It happens in server rooms, in police training centers, and in intelligence briefings. This is a mutual preservation pact. It ensures that no matter how hard the economic pressure gets, the police state remains intact. But a legal document, no matter how binding, is just paper. You cannot eat a treaty, and you cannot shoot a signature. To actually break sanctions, to physically survive an economic blockade, you need concrete, steel, and rails. This brings us to the second pillar of this alliance, the International North-South Transport Corridor. For 20 years, this project was a fantasy. It was a bureaucratic nightmare of different rail gauges, corrupt customs officials, and lack of funding. It was a line on a map that never really worked. But the war in Ukraine and the signing of the 2025 treaty injected this project with adrenaline. The brilliance of this route lies in where it is not. It is not in the Suez Canal where traffic can be blocked. It is not in the Atlantic where U.S. carrier groups patrol. It is not in the Mediterranean. It runs directly through the Caspian Sea. Do you know how many U.S. Navy ships are in the Caspian Sea? 0. Do you know how many NATO inspectors can board a ship traveling from the Russian port of Astrakhan to the Iranian port of Anzali? 0. The geography effectively makes it a black hole for Western intelligence and interdiction. Last year, using the momentum of the treaty, Russia finished the massive dredging operations of the Volga-Don Canal, allowing heavier ships to transit from the Russian heartland down to the Caspian. Last month, the final rail link in Rasht, northern Iran, became operational, connecting the Caspian ports to the Persian Gulf by train. Here is the reality of 2026. A ghost trade route is now fully functional. Russian grain and fertilizer go south. They travel down the Volga, across the Caspian, through Iran, and out from the port of Bandar Abbas to feed the global south. This earns Russia the hard currency it desperately needs. In return, Iranian drones, car parts, ballistic missile components, and dual-use microchips go north. They travel up the rail lines, across the sea, and directly into the Russian military-industrial complex. This is a closed loop. No Western banks are involved. No insurance from Lloyd's of London is required. The SWIFT banking system is irrelevant here. They have integrated their national payment systems, Russia's Mir and Iran's Shitab, to bypass the dollar entirely. This is a ghost economy. And every ton of cargo that moves along this line is a ton of leverage that the U.S. State Department has lost forever. Washington is trying to strangle their economies by cutting off the traditional arteries of trade, but Russia and Iran just built a new set of lungs. So, we have a legal shield for regime security, and we have an unbreakable trade route for economic survival. But there is one missing piece that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. Everyone asks the same question. Will Russia give Iran nuclear technology? Will they send the advanced Su-35 fighter jets or the S-400 air defense systems? We have seen reports, rumors, and leaks, but this is where the strategy of managed uncertainty comes in. For Moscow, the threat of transfer is actually more valuable than the transfer itself. If Russia hands over a nuclear weapon or massive amounts of advanced air power to Iran tomorrow, it changes the game instantly. Israel might feel forced to strike immediately, starting a massive regional war. Saudi Arabia might panic and demand American nukes. That is chaos. Russia doesn't want chaos right now. They want a slow burn. By keeping the West guessing about exactly what weapons are entering Iran, Russia forces the Pentagon to keep massive naval assets tied down in the Middle East. Think about the strategic cost. Every U.S. carrier strike group that is parked in the Persian Gulf to monitor Iran is a carrier group that is not in the Pacific protecting Taiwan. It is a carrier group that is not in the North Sea reinforcing NATO. It is a perfect distraction trap. Moscow feeds Iran just enough technology to terrify the neighbors and modernize their military, but they do it slowly. They do it obscurely. They make the West wonder, did they send the hypersonic missile technology or just the blueprints? This forces the United States to spread its military power thin. It stretches American logistics to the breaking point. It is cynical, it is dangerous, but logically, it is brilliant. And the main victim of this strategy is likely Ukraine, because historically, the political attention span of the West can only focus on one crisis at a time. By heating up the situation in Tehran using this new treaty, by threatening escalation in the Middle East, Moscow is betting that Washington will eventually get tired, lose focus, and make a mistake. We must also consider the message this sends to the rest of the world. We are seeing the formation of what some legal scholars are calling the League of the Sanctioned. North Korea is watching this. They are seeing that if you stick together, if you integrate your economies outside of the dollar system, and if you sign binding security agreements, you can survive Western pressure. The 2025 treaty created a template. It proved that isolation is relative. You are only isolated if you accept the West as the center of the world. But if you look at the map from Moscow or Tehran, the world majority, the global South, China, India, is still open for business. The North-South corridor doesn't just connect Russia to Iran, it connects Russia to the Indian Ocean. It connects them to India. It opens a backdoor to the global market that no amount of sanctions legislation written in Brussels or Washington can close. So let's summarize the reality of January 2026. The Russia-Iran axis is no longer a temporary marriage of convenience. It has matured. It is a legal fortress protected by Article 2, ensuring the regimes support each other against internal dissent. It is an economic fortress fed by the Caspian trade route, immune to naval blockades. And it is a strategic trap designed to exhaust Western military resources through the doctrine of managed uncertainty. The question is no longer, will they survive sanctions? They already have. They have adapted. They have built a parallel system. The question for 2026 is, how does the free world respond to a detailed, written, and operational plan to dismantle its dominance? So far, the answer has been silence. The answer has been minor sanctions packages that target individual companies, ignoring the massive structural shift that has taken place. We are trying to fight a network with a scalpel when we should be looking at the blueprint. I want to hear your opinion in the comments below. This is a complex topic with no easy answers. Do you think the U.S. should try to negotiate with Iran to try and split this alliance, revisiting the diplomatic strategies of the past? Or is it too late for diplomacy, requiring a much harder stance? I read every comment. Thank you for watching.